In this occasionally green and pleasant land, there are 500,000 acres of wasteland, much of it industrial wasteland and much of it owned by the National Coal Board. Their slag heaps that cover the coal fields are not only totally unproductive, they're eyesores too. And various attempts are being made to reclaim them and render them less objectionable. In the end, this usually means bulldozing them flat, covering them with topsoil and planting them with grass. It's expensive and laborious. But it is possible that a better and a cheaper answer has been found to the problem here at Stonebroom in Derbyshire. At the Wriggly Worm Farm.
The Wriggly Worm Farm, or the WWF, is exactly what it seems to be. For 7 years, Mr. Frank Lynham has been breeding earthworms in captivity. Millions of them. And there are dozens of happy anglers in Britain today who've cause to be thankful for genuine, well-fed, pedigree, plastic-packed wriggly worms. Though most of his customers are fishermen, Mr. Lynham does sell stock to schools and hospitals as well. There seems to be an inexhaustible demand for a bob's worth of assorted Derbyshire worms. And the demand can be satisfied partly thanks to Horace. Naturally, Mr. Lynham keeps a photograph of Horace on his desk because Horace was a bit of a lad, a father and a mother of a worm, quite literally. He was the farm's original stud worm, and since worms are both male and female, Horace has been mother and father to millions. In these concrete breeding sheds, his children are still reproducing themselves with great enthusiasm. And what's more, the fate of some of them will be more dignified than that of their ancestors. They're bound not for the fishing basket, but for the slag heaps. Pioneers in a labour force which perhaps one day will transform the north of England. Mr. Lynham has rented one slag heap from the National Coal Board for his experiments, and up there the worms are already at work, or so he believes.
Mr. Lynham, what is it that worms can do to slag heaps to turn them into flowering gardens?
Well, in the first place, at the moment, the slag heap is an unfertile mass of material, you see. So the earthworm can begin a cycle of events which will bring it back to life again, you see. This is done by introducing waste materials of different varieties into the slag heap, you see. And then I introduce the earthworm. When I'm satisfied that that material's taken all right, I introduce the earthworm. The earthworm then feeds on this material, and after it's passed through the earthworm, it comes out as neutral humus, you see. And then the neutral humus is then taken up by bacteria, and the bacteria then turn this humus into various chemicals which the plant roots can use.
Well, once you've bred your worms, is it a question of just bringing them up here onto the slag heap and digging them in and letting them get on with it?
Oh no, I'm afraid that wouldn't do. It's necessary for them to be fed, you see, like anything else. This material is quite inert, there's no life in it at all. Well, the earthworms just couldn't feed, you see.
Well, what do you do with them then?
Well, in the first place, I have to introduce some material onto the surface, a waste material it is, to keep down the cost. This is spread on the surface, and then it's forked in, you see. This is only one method of doing it. There are other ways, but the idea is to introduce humus into it in the first place, and then the earthworms have got something to feed on. And then I can introduce them onto the top. It wouldn't take very many. Just spread them round, and then I have to add further material then, you see, just to keep the birds and whatnot away from them.
What is it in the sack that you're actually feeding them on this time?
It's a mixture of town waste and just ordinary soil. There are lots of materials that can be used: feathers, brewery grains, sewage, all sorts of waste material. Every area, anywhere in the world, every area, it has some form of waste material. It doesn't matter what it is, even sawdust. It can be used by the earthworms.
Feathers?
Feathers, yes. They can be obtained in big quantities in the right places. And poultry manure.
What do you do with the feathers? Do you just put the feathers on the ground?
No, oh no, it would be necessary to let them rot down into a form of humus first, you see. But they're a very valuable source of nitrogen.
Well, now look, if you put your worms there and you fed them, how often do you have to go on feeding them after that?
Well, once I've got them established, it wouldn't be necessary at all, because a natural cycle would begin then, you see. And it wouldn't be necessary for either me or anyone else to give them any attention. They'd look after themselves.
I do notice that this particular tip hasn't done too badly without the help of your worms. There is quite a lot of vegetation on it already.
Yes, but it's taken 100 years to get there, and even there it's very sparse and it still looks pretty ugly.
Well, how long do you reckon it'll be before you'll see some results from these fellows you planted now?
Oh, only a few weeks, a few months. I'm supposed to be growing a tree on this particular plot for experimental purposes. We'll have to wait a long time for that, I'm afraid. But as regards grass and other plants, I could prove something with those in a matter of a few weeks or a few months.
Have you tried to interest anyone else who's reclaiming land, abroad, for example?
Not at the moment, but I've studied all these different countries. I've had reports in from many countries all over the world. I've studied conditions in the Sahara and in Holland, New Zealand, Australia, America and Canada. I've had samples sent from the Gezira area in the Sudan. I've really studied all these things. And the same principle can be applied anywhere. It doesn't matter where it is. The principle is exactly the same.
Well, there we are. In 20 years' time, this could be a beautiful wooded hillside if the theory works. And the Wriggly Worm Farm could be big business, the centre of an international chain of worm breeding establishments. So don't despise the humble worm. To you, it may be just a nasty, slimy thing, but one day it could be the jam on Mr. Lynham's bread and butter, if you'll forgive the expression. Good night.